Greetings. This is Dr. Luther Smith of the Renewed Mind podcast. We have a small favor to ask. We're seeking advocates who recognize the value of the program and wish to support us. Well, how can you support us? Well, it's really simple. If you enjoy our content, please hit the subscribe or like button or even the heart icon on your preferred platforms. This lets us know that you appreciate the information that we bring to you on the New Mind podcast. Additionally, if you think your friends or family would find our podcast interesting or helpful, maybe even entertaining, we seek to entertain here, please share our episodes with them as well. This is another fantastic way to advocate for the information that we bring to you. Our goal is to gather at least 500 advocates across all platforms by the end of this year. That is a lofty goal, and we know that. However, with your support, we can reach more people in this particular subject of counseling biblically and amplify the discussions and the topics that we explore here on the New Mind podcast. Thank you once again for listening. Grace and peace to you. And now let's dive into the podcast.
I certainly don't want people to think that I'm delicate, that I'm going to break even now, because I won't. Will I have to work through this? Yes, I will, but that's okay. To imagine the suffering that Christ went through humbles me because it's nothing compared. What he went through, what I went through is nothing compared to what he went through. And I'm just so grateful that he did, because I get to, like Colossians 3 says, to focus on the eternal things, not on what's below. And when I get really overwhelmed with anxiety to where it can paralyze me, okay, I have Christ, and doing the grounding techniques and things like that. But sometimes the only thing that's going to help me is knowing that I don't have to stay in this body for the rest of my life. I'm going to seize every opportunity while I'm here, of course, but one day I get to be with my Heavenly Father.
Welcome to The Renewed Mind, the podcast where we explore the world of biblical counseling and bridge the gap to a more holistic understanding of how scripture, psychology, and counseling intersect. The Renewed Mind is here to provide insightful discussions, interviews, and transformative ideas that align with the wisdom of scripture. And now your hosts, Dr. Luther Smith and Madeline Clark.
Hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever you are doing. Welcome to the Renewed Mind podcast. We are here, we are live, and you're still here. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Dr. Luther Smith.
And I am Maddie Clark. Thank you so much for listening to episode 6.
Let's discuss the topic we talked about last session. We talked about the 4 C's of counseling, particularly with grief and loss and tragedy. We went through a case study with Madeline. She wanted to bring up something and work through some issues. And we talked about the 4 C's, that being collecting information, that we shouldn't just jump in and begin to start fixing counselees, that we need to gather data. And the more data we get, the more clear the presenting problem becomes, and the more we're able to use that information to navigate with our counselees better. We can also use the information that we collect with the second C, and that is to connect with our counselees in an empathic and meaningful way, and using that information to build bridges and connect with them. Trust is a big factor in counseling. If we don't have trust, we cannot connect with our counselees. We won't be able to work with them, right? So we collect, we connect, and then there's comfort, particularly for those who are grieving and in deep loss, sorrow, tragedy. We want to instill comfort, and we will ask questions. We'll give exercises and interventions and instruments that we use for that very purpose, is to instill comfort in the individual. That includes if we give them assignments to take home, it's for that end, is to instill comfort. We don't want to do a theological treatise right away. We want to always read the room to make sure that they process those raw feelings and emotions before we express those. And the last one is to continue to give that individual strength and encourage them and when they are faint-hearted, or what we would refer to literally as small-souled, as First Thessalonians 5 says. This episode, we have a treat. This is an interview, hopefully the first of many. We're going to be talking to a person I loved very dearly. We're going to be exploring the topic of PTSD and anxiety. PTSD is found in adults and it can also be found in children. Clinicians don't usually assess a young child with PTSD until about age 6. Okay. Children express it in different ways than adults. So here's some of the criteria: exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence, and even chronic trauma, chronic abuse can also produce PTSD. Okay. It's the presence of one or more of the following intrusive symptoms. So these symptoms invade the person's mind and their sensations, right? Recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive distressing memories, recurrent dreams, dissociative reactions where one becomes detached from reality, intense, prolonged psychological distress, and exposure to external cues. So if they hear a truck backfiring or see an image, that sets them off. Marked physiological reactions to internal or external cues that symbolize the traumatic event. Avoidance of such events or perceived events that could possibly trigger the stress response. Negative thoughts, alterations in cognition and mood, the inability to remember important aspects of the traumatic event, exaggerated negative beliefs about oneself. They tend to blame themselves for what happened or tend to put that guilt on themselves. Persistent distorted cognitions about the cause or the consequences of the event. Persistent negative emotional states. Diminished interest in activities. Feelings of detachment or estrangement. An inability to experience positive emotions, irritability, reckless behavior, hypervigilance, exaggerated response. If you toss a ball at them and they do this type of thing, that is also a part of PTSD and some of the behavioral effects. If you want to know more about that, you can look at the DSM-4-TR or the DSM-5, and they give a list of specific breakdowns of some of the things that you see with PTSD. You'll hear this with our guest as she gives us some understanding and walks through PTSD and how she experienced it in her life. Let me invite on Tanya Smith. Tell us a little
Absolutely.
bit about yourself and the viewers out there who may not know who you are.
I am Dr. Smith's wife of 21 years. Can't wait for it to be 25 and then 30. I really don't know what to say other than because I've been a stay-at-home mom. I did have a career for 15 years in San Diego before we came to Kansas City. The goal for both of us was for me to stay home and raise our daughter, which I was so excited to do. She is absolutely the apple of our eyes.
So I'm very privileged. She's very supportive and I'm supportive of her. All right, let's go ahead and start with the origins. Tanya, you just heard some of the things we talked about, the affect and the effect of PTSD. So can you start from the beginning, very briefly, tell us some of the trauma you experienced that led to some of the symptoms and things that you encountered?
Yeah, it was interesting in listening, even though we've discussed this, I've discussed this with my therapist. I actually go through all of that, every single one other than reckless behavior. I'm actually the opposite of have to do the right thing. My trauma actually began, I'm not sure. I know that at the age of 15 months, I was told that the individual walked in the room and I was being thrown across the room. And the person that did that, they were warned that they better not see them do that again. And they just got more clever, made sure they weren't around. Chances are that probably things like that was happening prior to 15 months old, unfortunately. So really, I went through my whole childhood with constant trauma abuse. And it wasn't just physical. When you're physically abused, you're mentally abused, emotionally abused. I would say that tears one down so much more than the physical abuse.
So it sounds like there was a lot of early childhood abuse and a lot of early childhood trauma, which I would definitely define as big T trauma. before what we would consider the beginning of kind of crystallized memory. And that had huge impact. And then you said that continued. To tell us a little bit more about that. You said it continued through childhood. How did that impact you further as you grew up towards teenage years and later childhood?
Because I wasn't taken out of the situation, there were many people that tried to rescue me and my sibling, and it made things worse because the system is majorly flawed. Unfortunately, if you don't do your proper investigation on that side of things, just makes it far worse for the children or child that's being abused. Really, the physical abuse, I would say, overall stopped when I was in junior high. For those of you that were in junior high, we're old. It wasn't middle school yet then. The emotional and mental abuse was all the way up until 18. And in fact, I had to leave while I was still in high school, turned 18 in April and didn't graduate till June. One of the biggest experiences that I can highlight, because I think it's important for those listening that could be going through current abuse and you don't know how to get out of it, or you've been able to escape and haven't sought the help that you need for various reasons, which are all valid, in hopes to encourage you to get the help. Because I'll tell you, you're a winner getting the help. Yes, it's hard work. It can be scary, but I'll tell you, you're going to be a winner in the end. But for me as a child, I can go back on pictures and I can see the smile on my face, but I can see how sad that little girl was at 2 years old, at 3 years old, at 5 years old. But I disassociated a lot. I just remember having to go somewhere else in my head to survive maybe the moment, maybe the day, just to allow myself to go to sleep and hope that I can stay asleep. Because a lot of the trauma would happen throughout different times of the day. Unfortunately, we were wakened at 11 or 12 o'clock at night to either screaming or being dragged out of bed. A lot of my, I guess you could say, PTSD responses, if I'm saying that, you guys would have to correct me if I'm wrong, is due to night terrors. It was so bad that I had day mirrors, which I think I probably, to this day, I may have it once every few years. So that's pretty much ceased. But in order for a child to feel safe, I had to go somewhere else in my head. I had to create a whole other alternate reality. And that can only work for so long. So in my teenage years, I remember getting a Walkman, for instance, and that really kept me safe because I could just put the headphones on when I'm in bed. My peaceful place at that time, really at 9 years old, actually, it started, was listening to Crystal Gale. Her music and her voice is just so calming. Fans out there that love Crystal Gale, they'll know what I mean. Her voice, there's just something about it. She's angelic. I would hope that I can get through the song and be able to fall asleep and stay asleep. That's when it didn't happen. But I also had a deep belief and faith in God, even though I was Catholic. Prayer was a big thing for me. I thought if I prayed it away, it would stay away. I was also hopeful that maybe tomorrow it will, or maybe I just won't remember. You do some kind of weird things to survive.
I heard you say you dissociate just to be able to survive. That's a pretty big statement. And there's a lot of control that can have over your every single day because it's something you're having to pay attention to every single moment. And for nothing less than the mere symptomology of it, but also the relational implications of who's it's being done by. And then also, I imagine that it probably had a big impact on your ability to form relationships later on in life as well, because what we know about attachment and how God created us to connect with people. Dan Siegel says we're made to be seen, safe, soothed, and secure as children. And none of those things sounds like were occurring as a child. And so I wonder how that then impacted your relationships as an adult.
One of the things that I think helped myself and my siblings to have some solace, have some fun memories, good memories, is we did have loving grandparents. So when we weren't taken from them for a couple years at a time and we were there, that was my safe place. They were our safety blanket. So when we were at their house, we knew nothing was going to happen. So there's wonderful memories there that I really believe was a wink from God, because we have to remember we have free will and we're not robots. God doesn't, make us do or not do things. And so unfortunately, that's why we have suffering. I mean, we're living in a fallen world and we're all fallen men. No, I'm not making an excuse for those that abused me and those that didn't protect me or my siblings and take us out of that situation, because it very easily could have, they chose not to. There's no excuse for that. So please understand that, going through years of therapy when I was 18 to 23, and then throughout my life, it's helped me be able to forgive, not be angry. There's still a lot of pain. There's a lot of things stirring up, but I won. They didn't break me. And each day that I have to manage this, I win. I'm determined. I've told my husband this. I'm determined to completely heal before God takes me home. But if I don't, it's okay, because I'm still going to be better. I'm 47 years old right now. I am so much better now than I definitely was at 18, than I was at 23, than I was at 30. And there's a lot of things that God showed me I needed healing when I got married. It was just Luther and I for 4.5 years. When I became a mom, there were things that came up that never came up before until I was a mama. Which is a serious thing, because I had to be the perfect mother. I had to be everything that she deserved, because she didn't ask to come in this world. I wanted her. We wanted her. There's just a lot of components, and it's been difficult preparing for this to know how to sum up, because so much that you have to tackle. It is only through the strength of God that I can talk about this actually and smile and go, no matter how hard things get, the tears can flow. I win. Praise God for that.
That's extremely powerful. One of the things that sticks out to me is you said you still win. And I just want to pay attention to the context of this a little bit of you suffered really significant abuse as a child at that moment when we don't have the choice over our suffering. Someone has stolen that and taken it from you. And not only that, but in the context where you're supposed to be safe. And now what you're telling me is that you have won, and that you found healing, and that you are continuing to heal.
It affected my relationships throughout my life. I had friends, I had acquaintances in high school and throughout my life. But in high school, I realized I can't have my friends over. Half the time, we're just going to keep this school level. And I wouldn't even eat with anyone at lunch, because I didn't want to have that deep connection and then it getting ripped away from me. Because you have to understand, when you have pain constantly, you're trying to avoid more pain, but it's a very lonely place at the same time. Even as a high schooler that's becoming a young adult, your brain still isn't fully matured. There's a lot of vulnerability. And then you add all this trauma and abuse, and you don't want people to look at you. And I certainly don't want people to think that I'm delicate, that I'm going to break even now, because I won't. Will I have to work through this? Yes, I will, but that's okay. To imagine the suffering that Christ went through humbles me, because it's nothing compared. What he went through, what I went through, is nothing compared to what he went through. And I'm just so grateful that he did, because I get to, like Colossians 3 says, to focus on the eternal things, not on what's below. And when I get really overwhelmed with anxiety to where it can paralyze me, okay, I have Christ, and doing the grounding techniques and things like that. But sometimes the only thing that's going to help me is knowing that I don't have to stay in this body for the rest of my life. I'm going to seize every opportunity while I'm here, of course, but one day I get to be with my Heavenly Father, because see the face of God that saved me from my wicked sin. As far as relationships, I didn't form them until I got out of the house. And then all of a sudden I had all these friends. It was really interesting. I felt free. I felt like I was able to breathe.
You talk a little bit about Christ's death. Of course, the context of that is a little different, but there are some parallels. Christ was mistreated. You were mistreated. Christ didn't suffer needlessly, but he suffered at the hands of people who should have adored him. we see somewhat of a similar parallel here, right? That the people who should have adored you didn't. They used their influence and their power to essentially subjugate a person who was defenseless. And Christ, of course, not being defenseless, him being God and even flesh, but him being mistreated and subjecting himself to that mistreatment. There's some parallels there that the person that can relate to you the most is indeed the one who gave his life for you, which I think is really cool when you think about it in terms of you processing this, that using Christ as the anchor to process those strong emotions that you have and those things. That's cool to think about. So you had mentioned that you grew up and you had all of these friends. And as Madeline mentioned, whenever there is abuse, and particularly chronic abuse that is solidified in the mind of an individual, it impacts them even beyond the immediate family where this stuff is taking place. What would you say that when you were out of the house and you had all these friends and everything else, what would you suppose was the pivot point that you looked and said, I don't know what's going on, but I need to get help? What was the pivot point for you?
When I was 9, I always loved little kids. And I remember wanting to be a mommy. At 9, I said, I'm going to need to do everything I can to be the mother and wife that I need to be. It just wasn't a good example in the home at all, how marriage should look and things like that, which is, again, a little interesting because what 9-year-old's going to think about these things? I know when our daughter was 9 years old, she was worrying about sassing her mama, making sure daddy doesn't find out, and playing with her toys and her friends, and making sure she did her homework. Like, she's not worried about the future. I remember I did have a boyfriend at the time when I was 16. He was really the pivotal point to helping me understand at that point, because I didn't know that I would need counseling at 9. I didn't understand that part. But at 16, I was treating him like how my abuser would treat people, which is not a surprise, right? And he didn't put up with it though. And I thank him so much for that because he was the start for me to pay attention to that because I didn't want to be anything like that. And yet I was becoming that. And so we were together for 4 years. So obviously I was out of the house. I was a young adult. And there was a counselor. She was actually a LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. I did grow up Catholic, but I did start going to my grandmother's church because we did go when we'd spend the night with her to her church. And I loved it so much. But the Catholic Church Mass was boring. And going to evangelical church with worship music and praising God, I loved it. And of course, I go there. This woman is there. She offers counseling for super cheap. I barely could afford it myself and thought, oh, I'm going to need to take advantage of this because I'm going to need some help here. And so that's where it started. I was with her on and off for 6 years. I would leave for a couple months and come back and leave for a couple months, come back. But I would say overall out of the 6 years, maybe I missed a year in total. But it's hard to work through these things.
I want to point out one thing you said, and then I have a question about that. I would like to point out, you mentioned, is it okay if I say your daughter's name? Wonderful.
Sure.
Wisdom. You mentioned Wisdom, your daughter, which I just love that name so much. You mentioned when she was 9 that she didn't have to worry about the things that you worried about when you were 9. I just want to emphasize that as a testament to the reality of how healing has infiltrated the relationship, which you as your 9-year-old self desired so much, and how it's almost this full circle restorative relationship that God has given you. I don't want to necessarily conflate that too far, but there is this beauty that I think is worthy of being observed of how God was able to offer wisdom in your family as such a gift. And then for you to be able to confidently be like, I did give her exactly what my 9-year-old self decided.
Well, and I appreciate that. That was my focal point and why I did go through, I'll say, my own hell as a young adult going through therapy because I didn't become what you can say is statistic in terms of great rebellion. I was never into drugs. I was an alcoholic. I was not promiscuous. Now, I did have an eating disorder. I was anorexic. during that time. Thankfully, I was able to come out of that years before we had our daughter. The focal point was I want to be married and have all these kids. Then I need to work on myself because I need to be strong enough to be the wife I need to be in order to be the mother I need to be. How I was able to figure this out, I don't know. I think that I was just very observant and intuitive to what was going on around me as a child, that I knew what I wanted that was opposite, and I didn't know how to get there. When people deal with PTSD, I'm working with somebody right now, not on a professional level. The first person that I worked with over the years, I've worked with many people over the years, just volunteer type things. She's the first person that I completely understand what she's going through because she has the same exact diagnosis. She's more acute right now because she's very young, a very young adult. And so it's interesting to see the different behavioral things that are going on. I have to attribute it to a couple people in my life that kept God at the forefront of my mind throughout my childhood. And I was a very serious Catholic. I was just a very serious little kid about God. And I don't know how people make it without God, in all honesty. I really don't, because I don't know how I did any of this without him. He did save me, I would say, on a few occasions of, I can't do this anymore. Somehow he got me the strength to be able to push through. So fast forwarding to being a mother, we look at this baby and I didn't think about, gosh, how did I get hurt as a baby when I'm looking at her when I could never hurt her? Usually if there's memories, then that would come back like, oh, seeing somebody hurt a child, let alone a baby. Like, what are you going through? It was, we asked for her. We prayed for her. We got her. Praise God. I did miscarry before her. And so only having one child, it's just extra special to us. I think in the long run, it was good that we only had one child. I don't know that I could have handled any more, unfortunately, because of my mental health, which kind of stinks. That wasn't my fault, but it's okay because I was able to give my all to her. And her being 17 now, we have such a close relationship.
This is one of the reasons I believe why you advocate for children a lot of the time. So you want to be a purveyor of the defenseless because you were not defended. We just produce babies, right? It was just come home. Who's this? We have another baby. Not the other. We just produce babies. They're a joy though. But that's a part of your story. You don't want those who are defenseless to be defenseless. You want them to be protected. And that comes from what you went through and some of the responses that you had within your trauma as well. I think that's a great thing because you could take the situation and totally become a statistic. But it seems like from the focus you had and your focus essentially on God, and I would even extend his grace, who has motivated you in this direction. And it's cool to see firsthand how that plays out.
One of the things, because I had some college, when I did go to college, I had majored in child development. And something to understand for those listening or watching, it's really important that I think this is a good lesson on not judging so quickly, that we don't know people's stories. I didn't finish. I was so sick. I had anorexia at the time. I didn't understand what was going on. I was struggling to keep afloat. I had to work. I had to support myself, which was really sad for me because I wanted to work with kids so desperately. My husband has known me a lot longer than we've been married. So we were friends for a few years. He would always see me with someone else's toddler, taking care of them. My goal has always been I want kids to understand that they matter, not just because through mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, that the people that they interact with in their life, they matter to them and they deserve respect, just like we do as adults. I know society doesn't think like that. Kids are kids and they have their negative judgments on that. I will advocate and I will stand up for them.
I personally struggled with this concept of, does healing actually happen? Do we really get all the way healed? It's encouraging to hear you communicate that not only does healing happen, not only do we see these little pieces of repair that come in our lives and come in your life specifically, but then you can even move past just my wounds have scarred over to now I will go and defend those who are defenseless. And you have taken it to its fullest extent within the capacity of the broken world that we live in. I think that's really cool. I wonder how you got there in terms of you mentioned counseling a couple of times, you mentioned therapy a couple of times. Did that counseling process play into how you've gotten to the wonderful defender, strong woman that I'm hearing talk today? What role, if there was a role, did counseling play in getting you to that spot?
Just understand, because I'm older, PTSD was not, I guess, diagnosed for civilians, if you will. Can you correct me if I'm wrong? In the late 90s, early 2000s. If you went to combat and you were in war, yes, absolutely. My diagnosis was that I didn't learn until we were trying to adopt when wisdom was free. I went back to my therapist to say, hey, is this something that we can even do due to my past? And would this trigger a lot of things out of me? I need to be the best mother I can be for these kids if we're going to adopt. Otherwise, we need to put this on the shelf. And that was when she shared with me that she had diagnosed me with major depressive disorder. So she didn't deal with PTSD actually at all. In fact, it was very difficult. Now that I'm thinking back, I can see why it was difficult. I think she didn't really know what to do with me. That would make sense because at that time, therapists didn't understand that those that deal with ongoing trauma or trauma for a certain extended period of time, whether it was trauma itself or as a result of abuse. It's been so long, I can't really give you a specific example. I just know that it probably why it took 6 years, honestly. The example I can give you is I literally was scared of my own shadow. I thought somebody was coming after me and it was my own shadow. That's how bad it was then. Now, to this day, am I afraid of that? No. However, even though I'm so much stronger than I was then, I can endure anxiety responses. When different things happen, it doesn't crush me like it did at 18, at 21, at 23. But I've also gotten really good I call myself like an alligator. Now, I know that sounds silly, but when alligators are scared, they want to stay in the water and camouflage themselves, like down to the deepest part of the pond or lake to camouflage itself. I'm really good at doing that. Certain things that I go through to this day because I can camouflage myself. Nobody has a clue that I'm actually going through some pretty heavy emotional things at that moment when they're conversing with me. It's almost like I'm holding my breath until I can get out of there and get to a safe place. It was so different back when I was getting counseling. I praise God that this woman did not give up on me. I would cry all the time. I was not the fighter. I froze or I would flee. I was that one that would just cry. She was talking about all this stuff that I just recently got out of the situation. Everything was so raw. I could talk about it now. I could talk about details when Luther and I are talking. And I don't cry. And I'm not angry either with the person that hurt me. In fact, I pity them, honestly. And I really pray that they can understand that they have a savior, that they ought to act differently because of who saved them.
We've been married for over 20 years. I think what's incredible is when you first started off going to counseling, even though it was 6 years that you were in counseling, you said that when you were in counseling, all you did was just cry. Right? You just cried and that was it. I would submit to you that was not a waste of time, but a necessary step because when you're going through anxiousness or in your case, PTSD, you didn't have anybody to really absorb any of this. You took it all for many years. So when you go into counseling for the first time, where do you start? Where you just emotive dump everything. That was necessary so you could get to the place where you could talk about it in a meaningful way. You had to work towards that. I think when it comes to counseling in terms of healing, just to emphasize a little bit about what Madeline said, we have a certain picture of what healing ought to be. You know what I'm saying? And healing, when it comes to, I believe, emotional things and states of being and things like that, it's not like a cut. It's not you get a cut or a gash or something like that, and you could see it forming and things like that, right? I think it's more like a pressure cooker. You have all of this pressure built up, all of this stress, all of this trauma, all of this anxiousness, all of these thoughts. It's like our Instapot at home. When you turn it on, it lets all the steam out. Just You can think of your crying as that. You had nothing to say. It was just, we had everything to say, all in your tears, all in your wailing, all in your heaving, all of that, right? And this is a kind of a step. When a person is like this, we ought to let them do that for as long as it takes. Just sit there and just allow them. What could be behind that is 10, 20, 25 years of trauma, pain that they have to work through so that they can get to a place where they can talk about it and explore those things. I thought that is an amazing thing to experience.
Yeah, and if you've spent that much time having to dissociate, and I do say having to because God made our bodies with that fight, flight, freeze response. And it's for situations like that, right? Where that is your survival tactic. When you enter into a space where that's no longer the necessary response, there's a video of, I think it's gazelle, some sort of animal coming out of fight or freeze, and he falls over, plays dead so that the lion doesn't come and eat him. He coming out, and he's literally like shaking in his bow, like, and just coming out of it a little bit, making some noises. That is a very direct example of what is going on and why that emotion is so natural and honestly healthy too, because that is that space for you to be able to have those things that I mentioned earlier, seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And that's what we're trying to create when we create a therapeutic relationship.
What is the common judgment that people will have for those that cry?
You're weak.
Yep. You can imagine how many people have judged me that I'm weak. And I have had to come to the realization that I am one of the strongest people I know, because I choose to be vulnerable no matter what I'm going through on the inside. If it's going to benefit someone else, I will deal with my issue later. I'm going to put that aside so I can help people be saved over here. The great thing about some individuals that I did have in my life help give me the example, because there was an individual that I watched very closely throughout my life. This is the type of woman I want to be. The most loving individual that I've ever met. Very selfless. I believe that when God does create us and we're born with a certain disposition, and apparently from all the stories I hear, I came out smiling, just that smiling baby and that smiling child, which I find interesting. We've gone through what I've gone through. And our daughter can say, even when I was dealing with Lyme disease in 2019, I was the sickest I've ever been. And she said, Mama, when I would walk in to check on you, when you were laying in that bed, you would find a reason to smile. What she didn't understand was it was her. You were desperate when you're surviving every moment, not just every day. For me personally, maybe just because of the disposition that God gave me, I would try to find something that was good, something that was positive to hold on to. I think that's the only reason that I have this motivation to help people, especially children.
Certainly, this human suffering that you endured over a long period of time, giving you the ability and the strength to be resilient. And that is transferred into other areas of your life, including the time when you were dealing with Lyme disease, finding ways to smile.
So that's something that I want to encourage those that have gone through trauma and abuse. It has to be a choice. I chose to try to find people throughout growing up that I thought was a good example for me to follow. And I think my faith and my trust in God is really my foundation with all of these stepping stones. He's the foundation. Now he's building these blocks for me, and I'm responding to them. It doesn't mean that I'm not stubborn. It doesn't mean that I didn't run away and then come back. But because I wanted to please God, and I did have a wrong theology that if I wasn't good, then I'm going to have to do something so he'll love me again. It wasn't until I understood Psalm 139 when I was about 19 or 20 going through therapy. I remember reading that book, Psalm 139. I was falling like a baby. I was like, oh my gosh, like God loves me. He doesn't stop. He created. Why would he hate what he created? It was a huge 180 return for me. Now I want to love on everybody else.
Of course, looking at this, we also want to impact those who are seeking counseling, but we also want to impact those who are giving counseling as well. What would you say in layman's terms to those who are counseling, particularly from a biblical perspective? What do you say them working with those who have traumatic experiences, post-trauma, acute anxiety, things like that? What are the one or two things you feel that they need to do to connect or work with individuals such as this?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is to be very patient, to not rush, and I think the most important thing I know with working with this young woman is to not be abrupt. If you're patient, then chances are you're not going to be abrupt. If there's a trigger based on whatever's being discussed or depending on the therapeutic method, I'm personally going through EMDR, and my counselor was like, if it get too overwhelming, we're going to stop. She automatically says that from the very beginning. I just know that for me and for this individual I'm walking alongside, we don't feel safe the majority of the time. Unfortunately, even to this day, I didn't realize just how much I'm constantly having to put myself mentally in a safe place again. But imagine someone coming to the counseling room for the first time. Maybe they just got out of their situation. It is going to be so acute. Their senses are going to be, they're going to be on high alert, far worse than where I'm at, because I can bring myself down pretty quickly. And if I can't, then I get to run to my husband, which is a blessing. But patience, quiet, soft voice is the best thing you can do for them. Not rushing them, because if you're rushing, they probably won't come back.
Silence is a great tool in the counseling room. It's one of the, I think it's underused, to be honest with you, particularly with individuals who deal with trauma and abuse. So thank you personally for sharing that.
Your words are valuable. I know you're saying it's hard to talk to the professional. There's only one of us who's been doing this for 20 years. The other one's only been alive for 22.
I have a video. It is about 2 minutes long. This video comes from, actually, this was a conference that took place, I think, of April of this year. It's a little dated, but still pretty current of this year. As a matter of fact, it made all the news and all the rage. And this is John MacArthur. He is the pastor of a Grace Community Church, I believe, out in California. He actually did some really cool work during the lockdowns. He stood up in California when the lockdowns were occurring. He did a yeoman's work there. But I would like for you to listen to this, Tanya. It's about 2 minutes long, and then we'll get your thoughts. You'll be the first one. Now, we have to admit, I don't know if you're hearing this cold, Maddie Madeline, but Tanya's getting it full on cold. This is a raw reaction, raw response. She doesn't even know what this is about. Let me go ahead and throw this up onto the screen. This is John MacArthur and his presentation at this conference that took place in April. So let's take a listen.
There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies. To basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children. Medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential, well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way.
Okay, Mrs. Smith, your thoughts.
So he's completely out of scope of competency. We are psychological beings. God made us that way. If you are grieving, as his example he was using, for losing your buddy in battle, isn't that psychological? Those are emotions. Those are deep, painful emotions that you're going through. He didn't talk about anybody going to counseling. It was all about medication. It sounded to me like he was trying to go into a direction, but because he's out of the scope of competency, he's probably a very smart man, but because he was out of the scope of competency regarding mental health, he didn't know how to stay in alignment with his goal, which is to stand up for those that probably were not being, either didn't need to be medicated or being improperly medicated, and maybe not getting the counseling that they needed. I am not on a medication. I've never been on medication, actually, and here I am. It doesn't mean that people can't be on medication. I absolutely believe that people need what they need. And my wonderful husband is amazing in terms of advocating for how that should play out to keep the patient safe. Unfortunately, in this area, this man is ignorant, and so he's speaking ignorant. Ignorance just means he doesn't know what he's talking about, because this is not his profession. So really, shame on any of us that decide that we're going to use our platform that's rather large. And that's the very frustrating part. I don't like when pastors careful to this extent either, if they don't have a proper training. Because you will do more harm for your clients or your patients.
Because of some of the statements he makes, I don't say this in a disrespectful way, but he's part of the problem. He's part of the problem why the biblical worldview
Right.
has not been able to unify with psychology, is because he throws the baby out with the bathwater and makes sweeping generalizations about individuals who take pills. I don't think he's intending to do that, but the way he says them, it's one of the reasons why the scriptures and psychology are like this. This is the reason why, rather than being a unified discipline. You're right, he is out of his scope of competency, but he doesn't have to be if he actually knew how to unify the two together.
Or bring on one, say, an example like you, Luther. I'm out of my scope of competency, but I have someone that does understand these things. And together, that's the thing, is the brethren needs to come together and be able to marry the two. When one can't do, that's okay. We as Christians, man, we got to humble ourselves.
And when you say unify, it seems as though in this world of classically biblical counseling, that's the exact thing that is opposed, is we don't want to unify psychology. We don't want to unify psychology in the Bible, because then that's presupposing that you also have to make way to biblical authority or give way to what scripture says about the way that humans were made. That's where the mistake lies.
He said that it's grief. He said there's no such thing as. I don't know where you got your degree in psychology to be able to make that claim. Maybe he has not experienced someone to this capacity that has dealt with something like this. I know somebody very closely that has that same mindset. People that do that, I've noticed, what I found, there's a commonality, unfortunately. They do a lot of manipulation and they're gaslighters. That's the two common things that I find that I run into with people that have these types of judgments, that choose not to just listen, to possibly reconsider whether your end result is you still have that same belief system or not. They're completely unwilling. I'm telling you, if they were listening to this, they probably are clicked off after a few minutes. They don't want to learn, but that's okay. We don't need to talk to them. We're not going to waste our time with people that choose not to reconsider for the sake of people around them. We have to understand that we're walking amongst people. So many people are walking amongst me. They have no clue what I go through, what I've been through, all my story, because I'm not going to tell everybody. We have to understand that we don't know everybody's story. We just need to be kind people. I bet you have your own story too. Maybe that's why you're saying the things that you're saying. At first, I was getting hot, and then I went, he doesn't understand. I don't want to waste my time on him because he's not going to listen. I want to spend my time on those that want to hear this, not so that they can pity me, not so that they can feel sorry for me, or because I'm a winner. You guys, I'm a winner. And each and every one of you listening that is seeking help, good for you. I'm applauding you. Those of you that are on that fence, get the help. I'm telling you, you're going to win. You're going to win because there's healing.
There is an aspect to where big pharma is indeed out for money, and that ought to be acknowledged. But the fact that, again, you paint with the broad brush, there's no nuance. And I see his statements as very problematic because of individuals that make cases like this. Why you have such poor practitioners. They take what he says and then run with it. And that's unfortunate.
There is some credibility, like you were saying, Dr. Smith, to the fact that we can have more nuanced conversations about overdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, overmedicating, or what's the big motive of big pharma in terms of the overmedicating of this nation. There is some substance to that conversation in terms of how we function as counselors wisely, how we direct people, how we guide people. And I think it all comes back to our ethic that we present in our counseling from a biblical perspective. At the Renewed Mind podcast, we talk about how one of the number one things we need to do is take the person into context. Because you are an individual. Your story is not the same as everybody else's. To broad brush and to make the statement that you're just going to end up homeless. You've even lived in California at one point. You're going to end up homeless in California because you take a medication.
Or a criminal. This young woman that we're walking alongside, she's not a criminal. She's not homeless. We've walked alongside her very closely because she doesn't get biblical counseling. Luther and I both have had to walk very closely to even me going into a psychiatry appointment because they want to medicate her with a medication she doesn't even need for a diagnosis she doesn't have. When I asked them what her diagnosis was, it wasn't even that which they were trying to medicate her for. And here I come to find out the medication that helped her, I don't know, maybe they'll make $5 off of. I'm just giving you an example. Whereas the other one, they'd make $500. Of course you want to medicate her on the one that you're going to make $500 off of. So we don't even know what the pharmaceutical companies are making off of these. Here again, because I'm advocating for somebody else, I can be a bulldog. I'm advocating for myself, I'm not so much.
It's a very fallacious argument in a lot of ways, this argument that MacArthur is making. And we don't want to fall into the same pits that our interlocutors fall into in terms of accusation and name calling. But if he's going to give an example that's completely made up, that is not based on any validity at all, I can give an equally strong counter argument to individuals I know who have committed suicide because of his very thinking and his very way of viewing the world, because their shame surrounding treating their pathological issue, their organic issue with medication was so large due to philosophies and ways of thinking that align with what MacArthur is presenting, that the only option they decided was to have system overload and to just say, I can't anymore at all. And that has impacted the entire communities around these individuals who have taken their own lives. And this is not a unique story. I actually know of people, and this is a repeatable one that I can guarantee so many people who listen probably have heard as well on a personal level. This is not just some sort of, I'm going to make this argument up and make the claim that PTSD and all these different diagnoses don't exist. To have a nuanced, intelligent conversation where we can have pieces of information discussed back and forth about the validity of particular diagnoses or the necessity of particular diagnoses or medications, that's a discussion that I would totally love to have with someone who is in their scope of competency and who understands a biblical worldview. But that's not him.
Right.
Instead, he's making these large, overly stated comments to, like you said, a very vulnerable audience who are willing to listen to what he has to say. And he's taking advantage of a platform, which is, in my opinion, going to cause further harm than actual good. And now that's not to completely discount him. I don't want to commit a character assassination against this at all, but I do want to clarify the gravity of the philosophy which he's promoting.
Do you have any final thoughts for the audience, not just for us, but for those who might listen to this?
This went a lot less scary than I was anticipating. So I'm really excited about that. I really hope that those that are listening and watching this, whether you're a professional, because a lot of professionals go through their own trauma and abuse that led them to want to help other people, same as me, that why I wanted to help people. I just hope that I'm providing even one person with hope. Just know I'm in your corner. I've been praying a lot about this, and I will continue to pray for everybody that's listening, whether you're a professional or not, that the professional is taking pieces and really considering what we're saying here. I don't know how somebody could hear my story and still believe that there's no such thing as PTSD. How can a child grow up and not have a problem? I'm just grieving. And to those that need help, please get the help that you need. Like I've said before, and I know I'm a broken record, but you're a winner. You're not broken. You're still here, and you're going to get through this. I promise you. I am pushing 48 years old, and I'm here. There are many times that I shouldn't be here. With Lyme disease, it almost took me out, and I'm still here. And I'm going to fight to fully heal with this mental health until I die. Even if I don't make it, it's okay because I'm still healing. That's what's so wonderful about it. So please get the help that you need if you know that you need it. I'm here privately, quietly praying for you. I don't have to know you. I'm praying for you. God knows who you are. That's why I pray for you. He knows.
I'm really excited about what we're going to end up talking about next week, too, because I think we're going to continue the conversation about anxiety and how anxiety impacts people's lives. And it sounds like it's impacted your life. And prayer does make a big piece, one of those calming coping mechanisms as well. And it's super encouraging to hear how you have a story of redemption in terms of coming out of some pretty extreme tragic pain to such a strong confidence that you, in your words, you're going to win. And that sounds like winning every little day, every little battle, every little pain, every little reminder of the past symptoms that occur on a daily basis from PTSD, from Lyme disease, that you have to engage with, and the anxiety surrounding that as well. I know I'm encouraged by what you've shared today, and it does impact how I counsel, how I view my clients as well. So I really appreciate you sharing.
And another piece that I wanted to bring up, because you did mention that prayer really helps. I don't want people to misunderstand that prayer just calms you down. The reason it's really important that I have found as the patient to seek counseling, as I stated earlier in the podcast, I am currently in therapy right now, because they're the professionals to help me build tools. See, my first counselor couldn't give me the tools that I actually needed. And my husband explaining to me, honey, you just need tools. And I'm like, I don't have the tools. I thought I had a bunch of tools in my toolbox that I'm using. I don't understand what's going on here. And I'm realizing for the first time that there's tools that I don't have. And the only way I can get those tools is to get the counseling that I needed. So that's why I'm really imploring people to get the counseling they need, because prayer is not going to just make it all go away. I was told that my whole life, just pray for this person. They never change. They still haven't changed. That doesn't work. The prayer is in conjunction with the professional help. And there are times when you're going to need medication. I wish that I did need something to help control that acute anxiety. It took over to where there was a lot of different things when I was a young adult that I couldn't function. I couldn't finish school because I was so sick. For me, the stress came out in constant medical illness, hence why I ended up with Lyme disease and my body couldn't fight it off and was trying to take me out. You have PTSD, you have anxiety, you're constantly waking up at night, you feel like you can't function, you need the help, and it's okay. Don't be ashamed that you need the help. Who cares what people think? They just don't understand, and they're not taking the time to understand your story. You can move on. You can quietly, peacefully just move on and say, I want to get the help anyway. Because I was by myself. I didn't have friends and family supporting me going through this counseling at all. It was a very lonely place, but I did it because I
Amen
needed
to
to be a
that.
good mother.
So I want to personally thank you, not just for myself, but for the listeners. I believe that those who listen to this will definitely be touched by what you've shared. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having the courage and sharing your story. We will let you go, and then we have some final thoughts, and then we will close out the show. It's been a good one. Grace and peace, and I'll see you later.
Bye, Madeline.
See you later. That was fantastic. I was so glad that I got to hear her story for the first time for myself. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to talk about that and then also reflect on the worldview as well.
Yes, yes. I think it was also good too that the way that she unpacked it. I really liked the part where she had talked about her first process of counseling and how she just sat and just cried and bawled and wailed. And her counselor didn't say anything. That is a good again, I think that us as counselors working from a biblical perspective, again, this is all about weeping with those who weep, right? Encouraging the faint-hearted, right? Even just sitting there and allowing them to kind of gush out all of that stuff that they've been holding for a long time, I think is also beneficial and helpful. And that's a cool, cool thing. This has been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful interview. We hope to have more interviews in the future, get a couple of individuals lined up, then they can share their story. Also, if you listening out there, if you have a story that you want to place in the comments, if you want to tell us how you felt about the interview, how it impacted you, please let us know in the comments down below. You can also shoot us an email. I believe it's the Renewed Mind Podcast @gmail. You can email us your thoughts and everything else like that. Again, we are trying to get advocates. We want advocates. We want subs. We want subs. We want to do that because it amplifies the discussion. We thank you guys for viewing it. Our Rumble channel has just exploded, and we just appreciate that. We love that. We know that you like the content. Our Spotify is doing very well. Our Podbean is doing well too. So we'll continue to give you more content. If you like the show, if you like the podcast, if you like the audio, give us a 5-star review, share it with those whom you know, and be prepared for more content and more discussions and topics like these. Again, thank you so much. We appreciate you guys, and we will see you on the next episode. My name is Dr. Luther Smith.
And I'm Madeline Clark, and this has been the Renewed Mind Podcast.
Take care. Grace and peace to you guys, and we will see you.